All right, good morning and welcome to your new day. And breaking this morning, an American drone shot out of the sky by Iran. An Iranian commander says this is a clear message to Washington. This is how Iran deals with its enemies.
So this morning we are awaiting a response from the White House. Just hours before this drone was shot down, President Trump had downplayed the threat from Iran. So this is all developing as we speak. CNN has a reporter on the ground inside Iran. So let's go to Frederick Pleiken. He is live in Tehran. Fred.
Hi, Allison, and certainly some diverging opinions on this between the U.S. and Iran as to what exactly went down. The Iranians are saying that this drone violated Iranian airspace early this morning and was then shot down somewhere south of the Strait of Hormuz. The Iranians also came out just a couple of minutes ago, and we just got this, saying that the drone also masqueraded what they call its identification equipment. So they're saying that it essentially shut off whatever transponding equipment was on it. Now, the U.S. has a very different take on what happened. As you mentioned, the U.S. says that the drone was shot down over international airspace in the Strait of Hormuz. And the U.S. just coming out also a couple of minutes ago with a short statement saying that the U.S. did not fly any aircraft over Iranian airspace on Thursday. That is, of course, today. But you're absolutely right. The Iranians very angry about this, drawing a red line. This is what the commander of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps had to say. Let's listen in.
We have no intention to fight with any countries, but we are completely ready for war. What happened today was an obvious sign of this accurate message.
So there you have it, the Iranians saying this was a clear message to the United States. All of this, of course, coming, guys, as the tensions between Iran and the U.S. have continued to flare up over the past week since those two tankers were attacked in the Gulf of Oman. The U.S. blaming the Iranians saying it wasn't them. And one of the things you guys might recall is that after that incident took place, the U.S. said that around that time, the Iranians had also tried to fire, or did fire, at a U.S. drone that was flying over the area. They say that time they had missed the drone. So as you can see, those tensions still very, very much flaring up, as both sides say they don't want this to escalate into a shooting war, but the Iranians clearly saying they are prepared for a war, John.
All right, Frederick Pleiken, please stand by in Tehran. I know you're working your sources there. Meantime, let's get straight to the White House. CNN's Joe Johns is there. Joe, what are you hearing? Is there any White House response to this provocation?
I can tell you this. We've had one U.S. official speaking to me on email just a few moments ago, and that official essentially saying international airspace. And I've talked to the Pentagon. They say that they do know the National Security Advisor is going to be talking with the Pentagon, talking with the Secretary of Defense. But the one piece of information, the one sentence that the Defense Department will release is that the drone was in international airspace. So there you have the war of words. The significance of this, really, if you think about it, is this is the first time in a long time that we've had a United States asset involved in some type of unpleasantry or dispute with Iran. There's been a lot of back and forth as we've had this escalation between the two countries, and the United States has continued with its mixed messaging. On the one hand, we've had the information being put out there that they are sending a strike group in to the region as a show of force. On the other hand, we've had the administration suggesting that those attacks on oil tankers, for example, in the Gulf, are not as serious as they've been posed in the news media. The president himself on Fox just last night indicating there's nothing to worry about with regards to Iran. Listen.
As you look at the geopolitical work up there, Iran, Russia, China, tell me your concerns.
Don't worry about a thing. Everything's under control. The Iran deal that was made by President Obama paid $150 billion, paid $1.8 billion in cash. I terminated that, and Iran is a much different country. I will tell you, much different today than when I took over. When I took over, it looked like there was no stopping them. Right now,
well, you say they never get nukes?
But
they
we'll
never
see what
get
happens.
nuclear weapons?
I would say, if I were you, don't worry about a thing.
Nothing to worry about. That's the word from the president, but have to remind you that the administration said just this week that they are sending 1,000 additional troops into the region. John Allison, back to you.
All right, Joe, bring us anything as soon as you get it from the White House. Thank you very much. Let's bring in Maggie Haberman, White House correspondent for the New York Times and CNN political analyst. Maggie, great to have you here. Our military experts and analysts this morning have said this is the biggest test for the Trump presidency thus far. And how do you think President Trump will respond to a provocation like this?
I think he's going to respond similarly to what he said last night. I'm frankly more interested in what senior officials in the administration say. I'm curious about what John Bolton says. I'm curious about what Mike Pompeo says, because there has been a disconnect between what they say and what the U.S. is doing in terms of sending troops and what the president is saying. I think it is the president, we know, does not want a conflict with Iran. He is very aware that all of these foreign engagements have been very problematic. That was part of the platform he ran on in 2016, was no more foreign wars. So we will see.
You're saying there's a disconnect, that the message being delivered from Pompeo and Bolton is different than the message we just heard from the president there. Is there a disagreement in the goals inside the White House?
I think there is. I mean, I think that, look, if you look at what Bolton is saying, both currently and historically, Bolton is much more militaristic about Iran. This is not a surprise. I think that there is some belief that Bolton is much more interested in a conflict than certainly the president is. The president is the president, and we have seen over many months the president has gotten frustrated with the idea that John Bolton's words are being taken as having more weight than what the president himself says. The president is still the one calling the shots, but this is a new provocation. However, the U.S. doesn't seem to agree on what actually happened. So let's wait and see.
Well, I mean, as Joe just said, they think that it was over international airspace. And this is as we've been told, something like $120 million, maybe up to $180 million piece of sophisticated weaponry. And the president, as you and I, as all of us have talked about for years, is a counterpuncher. He doesn't like being provoked in a flagrant way like this. So will he be able to resist responding in kind?
He usually responds to a provocation when it's a smaller thing that he can punch and knock down. He's pretty aware that he can't actually do that with Iran. So I don't think you are going to see the typical, as if he were swinging back at a primary foe. I think that he is going to actually be a little more careful in what he says.
It is interesting when you listen to the language he used last night. Not dissimilar in some ways to the language he uses when talking about Kim Jong-un and the fact that he appears to have some operations building up his arsenal back underway. It's interesting to hear the president, who can get plenty hot with his rhetoric, downplay things.
He can modulate when he wants to. I mean, for all of the talk that he's just this unguided missile, sometimes he is, but he's actually pretty careful when the situation can call for it. And when he knows that he is out of his depth, right? When he knows that there are things that he might not necessarily have some great base of knowledge to act on and to describe something. So, I do not expect a ferocious response from him, but this is obviously developing.
Okay, so as we wait to hear from Joe Johns when he gets more reporting from what the White House response will be, let's talk about Joe Biden, who has gotten himself into hot water for these comments. He was trying, I think, to say that he's willing to cross the aisle and use the two most extreme examples of segregationists who were racist in the 70s. He said, I even had to work with these guys, basically. But
that isn't what he said.
No, it isn't.
That's what he was trying to say.
That's what he was trying to say. And he didn't phrase it that way. And that has gotten him into all sorts of trouble. And I think that you have pointed out that there is a bit of a Trump strain when Joe Biden basically refuses to apologize and says, this is my brand, this is me.
And demands that somebody else apologize to him, as he did with Cory Booker, which was just very clearly not going to go over well with Cory Booker. I'm not even sure that the point of saying something like that if you are Joe Biden. But look, he is like Donald Trump, north of 70. He is somebody who is set in his ways. He believes that this is who he is, and he should not have to make calls to change. And he is somebody, I'm so struck by this. The frontrunner's candidacy is leaking in terms of advisors saying, we're trying to get him to do something different, the same way Donald Trump's did, not just as president, but certainly as a candidate. There is something Trumpy about it.
I definitely want to come back to that point, so hang on to that for just a second. I do want to play, though, what the vice president said about Cory Booker last night, helpful. Demanding the apologies. Let's listen to that.
Are you going to apologize like Cory Booker
apologize
has called
for what?
Cory Booker's called for it.
Cory should apologize. He knows better. There's not a racist bone in my body. I've been involved in civil rights my whole career. Period. Period. Period.
Apologize for what? It's Cory using his first name, Not Senator Booker, who should apologize.
Right. Somebody owes me an apology. I mean, really, that part was the part to me that just was so incredibly resonant as something that the current president would say. This is not just sort of an idle discussion about words. Joe Biden needs the support of African-American voters in this primary if he is going to be successful. And this is raising an issue that a lot of people have had concerns about with him, that he is he right for this moment? Does he understand the current discussion about race, not just nationally, but within the Democratic Party, and what a generational divide there is? And again, he made a cleanup effort last night at a different fundraiser where he did say what you just described, which is, again, I think what he was trying to say. But you don't get points for what you're trying to say. The current president often is trying to say something, and then we are told that we misunderstood him. Again, I think that this is going to raise a lot of new questions about, Joe Biden's viability over the next several months.
Because what he seems to be saying, and what we often hear President Trump saying, or at least demonstrating, is that they don't really feel like playing by 2019 rules.
Right.
I mean, this has happened a few times to Joe Biden now, which is like some vague recognition that there's new rules, but he doesn't want to play by those new rules.
I think the problem for Democrats is also that, again, it's really, you can't really criticize Donald Trump for playing by new rules and then say we're going to do the same thing. I think they are trying to figure out what this all means. I mean, Donald Trump's biggest strength, as we have talked about many times, is a refusal to be shamed. And that is not necessarily something that we have seen Democrats want to emulate. So I'm not sure how this plays out. We saw one top advisor to Joe Biden leave the campaign amidst this. I'm not sure where this goes.
2 points. One, I just want to point out Jim Clyburn, who's the number 3 House Democrat,
that's important.
the senior African-American member of Congress, and other members of the Congressional Black Caucus have come out in defense of Joe Biden or support of Joe Biden. So that is out there. It's unclear what this will do to African-American support. But to that other point, as a campaign reporter, it sets off alarm bells when there are leaks. We tried to get him to not say this. We warned him not to do this, but he did it anyway.
This is the second time we have seen this in 2 weeks, for 3 weeks. The first one was over the Hyde Amendment, where Joe Biden was sticking by it for now, and then a day later changed his position. And we heard that there was all this TikTok from advisors on how they got him to where he was. It doesn't speak to a whole lot of respect for the candidate running, and it speaks to concern about themselves, the advisors, by trying to let it be known where they were. It's survivable, clearly, because Donald Trump had a pretty leaky ship during 2016, and he's president. But it raises questions about the operation's strength going forward.
And we don't know if Democrats play by a different set of rules. That's one of the unanswered questions in this campaign.
We don't know. There's a lot we don't know right now.
Maggie, it's great to have you. Thank you very much. We're following the breaking developments. Iran shooting down a U.S. drone. How will the White House respond? We are pressing. And overnight, the president launched a new attack on a familiar target. Hope Hicks refused to answer any questions about her time in the White House. The House Judiciary Chair, Jerry Nadler, says he will destroy the White House in court over their claims of immunity. The question is, when? Overnight, the president hurled fresh attacks on the Russia investigation and those who helped launch it.
What they did was unbelievable, that they could do a thing like that. And they reported to McCabe, who I think is a terrible, terrible guy. McCabe didn't do anything without Comey. McCabe was totally dominated by Comey. He did nothing. Andrew McCabe was a bad guy, but Andrew McCabe did nothing without calling Comey. He wouldn't, there's an expression, he wouldn't go to the bathroom without getting Comey's approval.
You heard the name there from the president, Andrew McCabe, and joining us now is the fired former acting FBI director, Andrew McCabe. Thank you very much for being with us, Andy. When you hear the president say that, what's your reaction?
John, I've been listening to the president say insanely stupid things for years now about me personally, about my organization, and about the investigation we undertook to find out if the president posed a threat to national security. I won't get down in the weeds with the president and exchange insults on Twitter or on TV or anywhere else. But I think the question we should be asking is, why do we have a president who feels necessary to attack individuals, private citizens, individuals who serve in our government, to attack people personally when he's scared of the truth that they have to offer? I think that's the more concerning question here, and unfortunately it's one I can't answer for you, but I think we saw another example of that last night.
You can't answer it. What do you suspect the answer is?
Well, as I said, I think the president is afraid. The president is clearly very concerned about the Russia investigation. He has been since its inception. He has good reason to be concerned about it. I think we've all seen now with the release of the Mueller report that there was substantial reason to believe that the president and those around him conducted themselves inappropriately and in many cases illegally. The Mueller report, the Mueller investigation, the special counsel investigation resulted in numerous convictions of the president's associates, so very clearly not a witch hunt, and ultimately exposed, I think, 11 different categories of obstructive activity engaged in by the president himself, not to mention the fact that it conclusively proved the meddling of the government of Russia in our democratic process and what's described as a vast and effective campaign. So, you know, I think those are all conclusions that that concern the president greatly. It's unfortunate that he responds to them by attacking individuals rather than by buttressing and supporting the system of democracy and democratic elections that we rely upon.
I'm correct, Andy. You have called for an impeachment inquiry, yes?
I think Congress should absolutely move forward with their constitutional obligation to have this information heard. I am not a politician. I'm not a political operative. I wouldn't dare to predict how that process would affect the election or whether it would result in the president's removal. I think those are all issues that are far down the road. The only thing that's clear to me right now, John, is that Congress has an obligation under these circumstances to air out exactly what is known by the government about the president's conduct.
You say,
and they should do that by calling witnesses.
You say Congress has an obligation, and my question to you is, at this moment, do you think Congress is meeting that obligation? Or put another way, if the White House goal here is to delay and drag this out, Hope Hicks claimed some kind of constitutional immunity, not executive privilege, but some kind of immunity yesterday and not answering any questions. If their goal is to drag it out, if that's their game, is it a game they are winning?
Well, I don't know if I can call winners and losers. I think it's absolutely clear that the White House is trying to delay and obstruct and bind up that process. So again, ask yourself, why is that? They're clearly very concerned about the public at large hearing in a vivid and compelling way the information that was revealed by the special counsel. So the simple fact that they're engaging in that level of delay tactics and obstruction of the Congress's work is something that should concern us even more. So turn that around, John. So let's talk about Congress. Under these circumstances, knowing what they know, confronting the sort of resistance that they're getting from the administration, if they don't act now, when would they ever? That's the question.
And again, just a simple yes or no. Do you think they're acting too slowly?
I think that they should be moving forward. I think they should be moving forward in a deliberate and careful fashion. They claim to be doing that, but it would be, I think it would be good for them to make a little more progress.
All right. I want to ask you about this report that came out in the New York Times over the weekend that dealt with a new level of cyber warfare against Russia. I'm not going to ask you about the facts that were in that. It said the United States is getting involved in the Russian power grid, but there was this tidbit in the article that said that members of the intelligence community kept the information about this operation from the president for two reasons. One, they were afraid he would overrule it and stop the operation. Or number two, that he would leak the details about it. What does it say to you if there was that concern from inside the intelligence community?
Well, I won't comment on the current operation or those details that were reported in the Times. But I will tell you from my own experience of dealing with issues very similar to that during the two previous administrations, that in my experience, those issues were dealt with at the highest levels in the National Security Council, with the deputies and principals committees, and with the presidents themselves. And it is really unimaginable to me that any intelligence agency would conceal relevant facts from the president, who is the ultimate decision maker. So I can't say whether or not that's happening now, but if it is, it would be a marked departure from the past.
Would you be scared in their situation that he would leak those details?
Well, I think we've seen the president speak impertinently to our foreign allies in the past. We've seen with conversations the president had with the Russians in the Oval Office where Israeli intelligence was allegedly exposed. So is there concern to think that the president might speak out of turn and reveal things that others would not? I think absolutely there's that concern.
All right, Andrew McCabe, the author of the new book, The Threat. Thank you for being with us this morning.
Thanks, John.
Allison.
All right, overnight, an American drone was shot down by Senator Mazie Hirono. She serves on the Armed Services Committee. Good morning, Senator.
Good morning.
Okay, so Iran has shot down this expensive, sophisticated piece of surveillance aircraft. They say they did it intentionally to send a message to the U.S. How should the U.S. respond?
Well, so far the president says there's nothing to worry about. There is a dispute as to whether the drone was in international airspace or in Iranian airspace. They say so, and there might be a dispute about that. But you know, this whole situation is, in my view, fraught with peril, in that if there's any kind of a kinetic strike by either country, it can quickly escalate into something that would be akin to a war, which in my view would require a new AUMF. But we know that the president doesn't want to go to war with Iran. He has said so. We need to have Iran come to the negotiation table. From the Iranians' viewpoint, I think there is a mistrust of the United States because the president summarily pulled out of the JCPOA, the Iranian nuclear deal. And so I think their perspective is, how are we supposed to believe that the United States is going to keep its word? So we need to create, I think, an environment where both sides, particularly at this point the Iranians, believe that it is time to come to the negotiation table. Apparently it's not that time yet, so miscalculations can happen.
Last night,
I'm very concerned.
On television, the president said that with Iran, there's nothing to worry about. He doesn't worry about a thing. Let me play this for you.
As you look at the geopolitical workup there, Iran, Russia, China, tell me your concerns.
Don't worry about a thing. Everything's under control. The Iran deal that was made by President Obama paid $150 billion, paid $1.8 billion in cash. I terminated that, and Iran is a much different country. I will tell you, much different today than when I took over. When I took over, it looked like there was no stopping them. Right now,
will you say they never get nukes?
But
they
we'll
never
see what
get
happens.
nuclear weapons?
I would say, if I were you, don't worry about a thing.
Now, in fairness, Senator, that was hours earlier, before Iran shot down the drone. But what do you think about the president's message to Americans? Don't worry about a thing.
I would feel much more reassured if we actually had in place a Secretary of Defense in the order of Jim Mattis. There are a lot of things that the president says that raises my eyebrows as to whether or not what he's saying is actually truthful or accurate. So there are those concerns. I'm glad that he thinks there's nothing to worry about. Maybe that's his perspective, but I think if you were to talk to perhaps people in the intel community or people Central Command, is that why there's nothing to worry about? Is that why we're sending 1,000 more troops to the Middle East?
Well, I was just handed this statement from CENTCOM, and I'll just read it to you. It says, U.S. Central Command can confirm that a U.S. aircraft was shot down by an Iranian surface-to-air missile system while operating in international airspace over the Strait of Hormuz at approximately 11:35 p.m. on June 19th, 2019. So according to the Pentagon, this was international airspace. So do you think that this requires some sort of response today beyond a verbal response from the U.S.?
Well, anytime we engage in what I would call a kinetic response, which is basically to attack something, to shoot a missile or something, it can quickly escalate. When either side in this kind of a situation engages in kinetic activity, it could lead very much to it could lead to an escalation, and that we could end up confronting a situation of war. Let us hope that that's not where we're going or what's going to happen. So miscalculations can happen in a situation like this. Meanwhile, we have a president who says there's nothing to worry about.
You were talking about the fact that we do not have a Secretary of Defense. So the acting Secretary of Defense, as you know, Patrick Shanahan, was caught up in this ugly episode of past domestic violence involving an ex-wife. You know, you voted to confirm him, and your committee, Armed Services, voted to confirm him. So do you bear some responsibility for not having done all the due diligence to figure this out?
The vetting is to be done by the FBI. Clearly, they did not do a thorough vetting. And believe me, the kind of vetting that gets done for somebody who's up for a deputy position apparently is different. And I would say there's a difference in scale. Now, if he was going to be nominated, which has been withdrawn to be Secretary of Defense, following somebody like Jim Mattis, particularly, we want to make sure that he's thoroughly vetted. And he was not thoroughly vetted. And this is an administration that does not thoroughly vet the people that they push forward for leadership positions. It's one of the reasons I think that there are so many acting secretaries and acting people all over the place, because we do not have confirmation hearings for people who are in an acting capacity. And as Shanahan has been acting defense secretary for 6 months. As far as I'm concerned, the next Department of Defense secretary, whether acting or not, should have to come for a confirmation hearing, and that vetting process should be complete. And it is generally not in the case of this administration. We all know that.
All right, Senator Mazie Hirono, thank you very much for taking time to be on New Day with all of this breaking news. We appreciate it.
Morning.
John.
All right, as Allison said moments ago, breaking news. We just got a response from the U.S. military on this Iranian attack on a U.S. drone. We're pressing the Pentagon for more shoot-down of MH17 and the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. But it's worth remembering the blizzard of lies, disinformation, and finger-pointing they engaged in, so we can spot it the next time a regime tries to get away literally with murder. John Avlon with the reality check. John.
Look, sometimes justice delayed is not justice denied. Authoritarian regimes try to get away with murder through outright lies and disinformation campaigns. They attack the credibility of investigators and loudly proclaim their innocence. But the truth eventually comes out. And yesterday, we saw the results in definitive reports on two of the defining crimes of our time. The first was the shoot-down of Malaysia Airlines Flight 17 over Ukraine, killing 298 innocent civilians. The missile was Russian. The shooters believed to be Ukrainian separatists backed by the Kremlin. The second was the murder of Washington Post columnist Jamal Khashoggi. His grisly execution was shrugged off by the man suspected to have ordered it, Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, and all but excused by President Trump. Now, you know the stories, but do you remember the litany of lies that were spewed as the news unfolded? Well, calling out those lies is also part of the process of accountability. Now, just before MH17 was hit, video showed a Russian missile system moving across the border and then shipped back to Russia -1 missile just hours later. There was intercepted radio traffic of the rebels discovering they'd mistakenly shot down a passenger jet. Now, despite all of this, when our colleague Chris Cuomo traveled to interview the rebel leader, he was greeted by an eye roll heard round the world and told it was all fake news.
It is very simple to disprove it. All of the information that comes through the internet, in my opinion, is practically all lies.
Putin and his Kremlin cronies denied having anything to do with the shoot-down and spread disinformation. They said Ukrainian military jets had shot down MH17, or the real target was Putin's presidential plane, even floating the idea that MH17 had been stuffed with corpses before it took off. Now, some of these stories were picked up by state media. Russia protested the international investigation was biased against them and then tried to hack it. Now 3 Russians have been charged with murder, all with Kremlin ties, along with 1 Ukrainian rebel leader. Likewise, after the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, Saudi Arabia played dumb and hoped the world wouldn't pay sustained attention. First, they tried the outright lie, with MBS telling reporters, "My understanding is that he entered the Saudi consulate and he got out after a few minutes or 1 hour. We have nothing to hide." Well, that fit their cover story, sending one member of the hit team out into the streets wearing Khashoggi's clothes. When Turkey identified 15 suspects, Saudi Arabia said they were just innocent Saudi tourists, one of whom apparently liked to travel with a bone saw. Now, after a personal call with the Crown Prince, President Trump echoed the Saudi line.
It sounded to me like maybe these could have been rogue killers. Who knows?
Then the story shifted again. It was actually a fistfight gone wrong. Well, finally, the Saudis admitted the killing may have been premeditated. Now, throughout all the lies, the Trump administration gave MBS every benefit of the doubt, even trying to prevent the CIA director from briefing Congress. Now, a 5-month investigation confirms Saudi Arabia is responsible for the murder. Said it's also time to look directly at the Crown Prince. These definitive reports won't bring justice on their own, but they make it much harder for authoritarian regimes to avoid accountability. That's why it's important to list the lies that were spewed at the time as well. So the next time we hear them, we'll know that someone's trying to get away with murder. And that's your reality check.
John, we so appreciate you reminding us of this all the time. We cannot forget the history that led here and what was said at the time. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
All right, new this morning, more than 70 police officers pulled from duty in Philadelphia over allegations of racist, hateful, and violent social media posts. CNN's Bryn Gingras is live in Philadelphia with more. This is horrible, Bryn.
Yeah, Allison, we're talking about 72 police officers here in Philadelphia alone, taken off the streets, restricted to desk duty. And this is all in response to a research project called the Plainview Project. This was a compilation of Facebook posts that this group looked into at 8 different police jurisdictions across the country, some as big as Philadelphia, Dallas, some as small as Lake County, Florida. And they compiled all these Facebook posts. My producer and I took a look at them, and it's police officers, both retired and active. And in the Philadelphia case, we saw, imagery that was shared with comments added to it. In some cases, the police officers called people animals or rabid. There was anti-Muslim comments. So it was a wide range of comments that was listed on this particular website. Now, the police department here says that they're looking at each of those comments independently and also with an independent law firm because they're trying to determine, are they protected by First Amendment right, or could they be considered threatening? And they said they're not going to make any determination on the fate of those officers until that investigation is done. However, they are still speaking out. Take a listen.
But it makes me sick, to be honest with you. It really makes me sick because we are in a position to know better. There's no question that this puts us in a position to work even harder than we already do, to cultivate relationships with neighborhoods and individual groups that we struggle to work with or struggle to maintain relationships with now.
Yeah, so they're very much aware of the impact this could have on their community, especially at a time Philadelphia is seeing crime in this area. As I said, it's not just Philadelphia that experiences part of this project. St. Louis is another department. In that case, 22 officers are being restricted from taking their cases to court because the attorneys over there say that it could be seen as an unbiased case. So we'll see what happens in other jurisdictions. But, John, certainly this is something that's raising eyebrows in this area particularly. John?
All right, Bryn Gingras, as you said, this story is developing this morning. Please keep us posted. Happening now, Planned Parenthood in Missouri is planning to defy Missouri law as the last abortion clinic in the state fights for survival. CNN's Ryan Young, live on the ground in St. Louis. Ryan, what are you hearing?
Well, John, they actually have a sign on the front here that says they're still here. But, of course, a lot of people are trying to see what will happen in the next few hours. What we do know is the medical professionals here have decided not to perform a second pelvic exam. That pelvic exam, of course, is something that is required by the state. But the medical professionals here believe that is medically unnecessary. In fact, take a listen to one of the doctors.
We've been having to put women through something that's totally unnecessary, uncomfortable, inhumane, just because the state has reinterpreted the rules. Just doesn't seem fair. Abortion care is health care, and we don't ask to be treated differently. We ask to be treated the same as every other health care provider.
Now, this could have some real consequences. In fact, tomorrow there'll be a ruling about whether or not they'll be able to keep the license here to keep this place open. So a lot of people are paying attention to this, especially in the state where they have some very restrictive laws when it comes to abortion. This is the last one, but a lot of people, of course, Allison, have a lot of questions about what will happen next. We should know by tomorrow at 1 o'clock what should happen with this facility.
Okay, thank you very much for all of that reporting, Ryan Young, for us. So a Rust Belt voter who voted for President Obama and then President Trump explains why immigration is such a hot topic.
You purposely walk through 2 countries.
So whatever
with
happens to
your
them
kids.
happens, is what you're saying.
If I put my child in harm's way, it is my fault, not yours.
All right, much more from